This video will explore the history of Latin America's longest conflict and the important implications of the recent peace process on Colombian politics and society. The Colombian conflict is a half-century-long conflict between right-wing government and left-wing guerrillas sparked by the assassination of liberal presidential candidate Jorge Eliezer Gaitan in 1948. This quickly escalated into La Violencia, a civil war that lasted for 10 years until a power-sharing agreement emerged between the liberal and conservative wings. The agreement eliminated any political competition outside these two groups, leading to the rise of communist guerrillas. Aiming to crack down on communist movements in Latin America, the United States backed the conservative Colombian government. To resist the repression, liberal and communist militants and farmers joined forces to form FARC, or the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. The FARC fought to secure justice with communism and protect the rights of poor citizens from government oppression. In addition, the guerrillas operated a lucrative cocaine business generating up to some $3.5 billion a year. While FARC officially denies its involvement in illegal drug trafficking, the cocaine trade has been critical to the group's survival since the 1980s. Given the severity of violence associated with drug trafficking in Colombia, government forces redefined the war against FARC as a war against terrorism and drugs. The human cost of Latin America's longest civil conflict is enormous. Approximately 220,000 people died from 1958 to 2013, 80% of which were civilians. 5.7 million people, or about 16.9% of the population, were internally displaced, making up the world's second largest population of internally displaced persons. More than 25,000 Colombians disappeared throughout the conflict. All parties involved have committed countless acts of injustice, like kidnapping, massacre, sexual violence, assassinations, and more. In September 2012, a historic peace process began in Havana urged by Cuban President Fidel Castro. FARC leaders and representatives from President Juan Manuel Santos' administration engaged in nearly 4 years of negotiations before agreeing upon a definitive peace agreement on August 24, 2016, comprising 4 major areas. 1. Land reform pushing economic and social development of rural areas and providing land to poor farmers. 2. Political inclusion, enabling FARC rebels to participate in national politics after the peace deal. 3. The elimination of all illicit drug production and trafficking associated with FARC rebels. 4. Provisions to grant amnesty to former combatants and reintegrate them into society. This would not apply to those guilty of the most serious human rights abuses. For victims, a Truth Commission and Reconstruction Fund would be established, alongside an International Transitional Justice Tribunal. The agreement was put to a public referendum early October 2016. Opinion polls beforehand revealed a sharply divided nation. Rural areas, comprising the majority of victims and where FARC maintained its strongest presence, were largely supportive of the deal, while urban centers, where the conflict had relatively less impact, were largely against. The emergence of yes and no campaigns, with ex-President Álvaro Uribe at the helm of the no voters, undermined the legitimacy of the peace deal. It was narrowly defeated in the referendum. Just over 50% of Colombians voted no, while 49.77% voted yes. This was devastating news for those who had high hopes for peace. That same week, President Santos was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his role in the peace process and was urged not to let go of the momentum. Santos promptly sent representatives back to the negotiation table with FARC, which remained committed to the process as many rebels wanted the chance to start new lives as civilians. On November 30, FARC and the Santos administration reached a new peace deal that was submitted directly to Congress, bypassing the ballot box. With Santos' coalition holding the majority, the deal passed 130-0 in the lower house, with opponents abstaining. While this historic event officially closed the chapter on the war, many remained discontent, not least due to the undemocratic nature of the second deal. Opponents voiced concerns that rebels will be let off too easy with a deal that contained little punishment for drug traffickers and war criminals. Still others chose the path of violent reprisal. In the days between the first settlement and the final adoption of the deal, 13 leaders of grassroots activists were murdered and many others injured and harassed. Before implementation of the deal can begin, Congress must make constitutional amendments and pass a number of bills. The process is likely to be deliberately prolonged by opponents in Congress. In the meantime, Colombians remain wary of slow progress and anxious to see tangible change. Despite tensions, the deal marks a milestone for a nation giving a chance to peace. If implemented successfully, it spells political, social, and economic transformations for Colombia and the wider region. The complications of reintegrating former combatants into a divided post-conflict society remains to be seen. For now, as rebels begin to put down their arms, there is hope that the nation's most tumultuous times will soon be history.